Whether or not one wants to argue if adolescence is its own unique time period, we still know that there are many changes that are taking place. And so, again, going back to this idea of a social transition, these new rights, roles, and responsibilities, what does this actually look like? We call this social redefinition. And if you think about all of the different changes that take place in adolescent years, like think about things that are related to if it's legal or illegal. So getting your driver's license, again, typically at the age of 16. Being able to work outside the home. Yes, you can get work permits earlier, but typically I think it's still 16. Being able to um, say smoke, that used to be 18 up until about a year ago. Now it's 21. Being able to gamble, 21. Rent a car, not till 25. So all of these different activities are viewed in terms of the legal system as these new opportunities. At a certain point, you shouldn't be able to do this, but at some point you can. And, honestly, a lot of those ages associated with those specific behaviors seem pretty arbitrary. Why is it the case? Well, again, when it used to be that smoking cigarettes was at 18, but drinking was at 21, where did those numbers become established? When I used to teach an adolescent development class before we were under semesters, I would have students write a paper on this topic, choosing one particular right, something that has a law associated with it, and to use empirical research to support that age, so support the drinking age at 21, for example, or to use research to support a younger or an older age. Again, depending on what the research says, what is the right answer? And in many cases, it still just feels really arbitrary. That said, these new rights, roles, and responsibilities really make adolescents think about themselves in different ways. We've talked about this with puberty, that if you have these changes that are happening to your body, this could affect the way that you see yourself. It also affects the way that people see you. So similarly, these new rights and roles and responsibilities have that same kind of effect. They affect how you see yourself and how other people are seeing you. One way to think about this is if you remember getting your license and being able to drive independently, the first time that you were out by yourself, driving around. And I know some of you might not be drivers, so you might not have had this experience, but many of you have. I remember the first time that I was out driving, around by myself. I just remember thinking like, "Oh my gosh, I hope people see me. I feel like a big deal." And even though it seems so silly right now, that's a huge change. Something that I wasn't able to do in childhood, but something that I was able to do in adolescence. It made me think about myself differently. Similarly, having your first job, or if you're 21 or will be soon 21, going to the bar for the first time. You view yourself in different ways. This is, again, a social transition. Social transitions also have a huge impact on autonomy development. So this is, we're going to talk more about autonomy in class or in a lecture coming up. But this is essentially a form of independence. When you're able to go to work for the first time, usually parents aren't there at your after school job or weekend job. When you're out driving the car for the first time by yourself, it's freedom that you didn't have before. So this really affects how you see yourself and what you're able to do. This is also the first time in your life, really, more or less, that decisions might have long-term consequences. So with that new freedom and those new rights and roles and responsibilities, this could affect you in ways that it couldn't have affected you in times past. So again, as an example, think about people that you know, maybe this applies to you, that when they're first away at college, where parents aren't around, where they have freedom. This is a social transition, even if it doesn't have a legal, right associated with it. Where there are some college students who make some pretty poor decisions when they get to college. Maybe they're drinking too much. Maybe they are not sleeping properly. Maybe they're partying too much just broadly. And this could have long-term consequences for their health, for their academic career, and so on. And so this is just one example of how it could have long-term consequences. But with this new freedom and these new rights, rules, and responsibilities, this can really affect us in the long run. When we talk about redefinition, so how we are, again, redefined by society, new rights, roles, and responsibilities, this is a process. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. Already when I was talking about the different changes that are related to legal matters, we see that driving and working are at 16, we have voting at 18, and we have being able to go to the bars at 21. So already you can kind of see how that's a process. But when we talk about the process of social redefinition broadly, there tends to be three common practices that we see in adolescence, not just in the Western world, although I wouldn't say these are all exactly universal. The first practice is kind of like these like stepping stones. One of the common practices is that we start to separate either physically or symbolically from our parents. And again, if we're getting new rights, roles, and responsibilities and we're working towards becoming more autonomous, this means that we need this separation from parents. So in terms of what this looks like is in early or in late childhood, we start to have sleepovers. And when we're having sleepovers, not just necessarily with staying with family members, but um, going out to your friend's house. If I asked you, many of you would say that you started to have sleepovers, let's say at the age of 8. Although I know that that's not universal. Some parents don't like you to sleep over, and some parents have sleepovers much earlier than that. But this is already a separation. When we get a little bit older, we start to see individuals going to summer camps, like sleepaway camps, or to boarding schools. In earlier times, we would have adolescents who'd be physically separating from parents to go learn new skills that would help them in a workplace environment. I guess there still could be possibilities of people doing that in today's society, but this was more common in times past. We see a huge separation for many individuals when they go away to college. I know that not all students are moving away from their parents when they're going to college, but this is common in many adolescents. So we need this separation in order to develop those skills that we need in order to be autonomous. And we need these separation periods because again, society is just telling us that we need to develop these new rights and responsibilities. Another common practice related to social redefinition is that we really start to see an emphasis on differences between, I want to use the word genders. Again, sex is more often used in the empirical research, but we really are talking about gender. What I mean by this is that when we talk about children, boys and girls, I mean, there are times in different individuals who treat boys and girls differently, but it's less so than it is in adolescence. So if I were to pose the discussion question to you, how are adolescent males and females treated differently by society, and had you ponder on these ideas for a while, I guarantee that most of the ones that appear in the list on this slide would come out, at least in a classroom setting. And it's because you can think about it from your own experiences. You can think about it from your own lives, maybe even in your own families. This is just a summary of some of the ways in which girls and guys are treated differently by society. And I use that term society broadly. So this could be, it could be within your own family. It could be within your own culture. It could be in the broader culture and so on. But even if you aren't treated differently or you don't really feel many of these differences, you've heard of these differences. Let's talk about them a little bit more. By and large, we start to see in adolescence where boys are given more freedom and girls still are more likely to be under more adult control. What does this mean? This means with curfew, for example. This means where parents are asking, where are you going? Who are you going with? Um, this means going out on your own independently. I'm not to, it's not to say that parents don't have good intentions and that there may be times where as females, and obviously this is a class of all females, we are quite aware that there are times where we aren't as safe in society. And so it's not to say that part of this isn't based on reality, but some of the restrictions that are different between males and females. And for those of you who have brothers, maybe you can directly compare your experiences with your brother's experience. But we do see differences between males and females in this way. Another big difference we see is in terms of sexual behaviors. And this is a message that is changing. It's changing in the direction of becoming more egalitarian, but we're not there yet. The same idea is that with girls more control and boys less control. If we see a girl engaging in sexual behaviors, and I don't just mean intercourse, any kind of sexual behaviors, we're more likely as a society to judge that girl for those behaviors, whereas for boys, less likely to judge them for those behaviors. Even again, if this is not true in your own life, and if it's not, that's wonderful and great. I expect that you've heard about, these stereotypes and viewpoints towards males and females depending on their, or based on their sexual behaviors. Another big emphasis or difference is between what kind of skills we're giving adolescent females and what kind of skills we're giving adolescent males. For even if you think about chores in the household, we typically see girls being given more skills related to domestic roles and boys given more skills that are related to kind of more workforce or industrial kinds of skills. Is this necessarily problematic? No, right? Not necessarily. I know in my own household, like I'm the one who does the laundry because I like doing the laundry, or I don't want my husband to shrink my clothes. I'm typically the one who's making dinner, and again, part of that is because I like to cook. So, and he's the one that's taking out the garbage or mowing the lawn. So I'm not saying that, you have to have it completely, a gender for all activities, but just think about in your own lives, or perhaps you can think about people that you know closely. If you don't have siblings or if you don't have a brother, how do they divide labor and what kinds of skills are we getting? I just thought of another example. I mean, if you think about taking care of a car, it's typically more likely the case that a boy in a family is going to be given lessons about how to maintain a car, whether that's an oil change or just basic repair, than a female. But in reality, we all drive cars and may all need those skills. Similarly, boys aren't in a situation where they always have somebody to cook for them, and so cooking is a skill that might be beneficial for everyone. Not to say everybody wants to do it, but isn't it a skill that everybody could use? Again, this is not an exhaustive list of every way that boys and girls are different and adolescent males and females are different or treated differently by society. Just a quick overview of some of the ways that are more commonly discussed. I want to point out that here is another way or another place where culture really does make a difference, though. If we're looking at places that are in the non-Western world, privileges may be so different between males and females that adolescence as a whole is an entirely different experience. I think about places where females aren't able to go out on their own unless they are with a male relative. And if that's the situation, think about how that impacts autonomy development, among other things. So I just want to couch this whole conversation in culture to make sure that we're all on the same page, that I'm not saying that what we have in the United States is perfect by any means, but we have to think about this differently in culture from culture to culture. All cultures are going to have differences between genders, but what does this actually look like from place to place? It's very different.